Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. Military spouses experience one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, and behind that statistic are stories of resilience, reinvention, and determination. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Roeder, Director of Partnerships and Member Engagement at Armed Forces Mutual, also a military spouse and a mom, whose personal journey through military life, transition, and financial rebuilding fuels her mission to empower other spouses. So today, we're diving into careers, finances, and how military spouses can take control, even in the most uncertain seasons. So, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to turn it over to you just to kind of tell us a little bit more about you and high level, your connection to this community and your story, as I know we'll get into a lot
Yeah.
more as we go on.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Hannah, for inviting me here today and to talk about something, as you said, that I'm very passionate about because I've lived it and breathed it from a personal and professional aspect. So, a little bit about me, my journey as a military spouse. I was married very young to my Marine and went through active duty military life and lifestyle during OIF and OEF. So high cadence of deployments and moves and raising children on your own, all of that for about 10 years. And then we made the decision to transition from military life into the civilian world at the 10-year mark. And our transition was rocky. And we decided that we were better as co-parents than we were married. So went through a divorce and became a divorced military spouse. And that kind of closed and opened a certain chapter of my life. And then years later, another chapter opened, and I became a wife again. And I married my husband, who was going through the end of his military career, retiring after 23 years. And so now I'm a veteran retiree military spouse. So I've kind of lived every life I think you could live as a military spouse, which is a little unique.
It
So,
is. It is.
yeah.
And maybe tell us a little bit too about what you do at Armed Forces Mutual.
Yeah. So I've been with Armed Forces Mutual for almost 16 years now, and I'm the Director of Partnership and Member Engagement. I lead our team that helps our members and helps the military community really understand what's going to happen to you financially when you transition from the military. So, what are those really big financial impacts when you leave something that maybe you've been a part of, a community, a life, a lifestyle you've been a part of for maybe 4 years, 10 years, 20 years of your life? You leave that, there is a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of it is around financial. And so we want to empower and educate the service member and the military spouse so that they understand what's coming and how they can gain control of that and set themselves up for really good financial footing when you do leave the military so that you have a better chance of handling all the other stuff that comes when
Yeah,
you leave the military.
because it's all the stuff all at once.
Yeah.
The finances is, kind of need that to live.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Yes, vast personal and professional experience to bring to this
Yeah.
conversation, which we're grateful for. So as you mentioned, you've really kind of experienced multiple seasons of
Yeah.
military transition, post-service, family life. What would you say on the topics that we're talking today are
Hmm.
some of those kind of bigger challenges that you face that now you're kind of seeing how some of this stuff, would play
Yeah.
into that?
It's nice, right? It's sometimes you get to take reflection back, right? And think, you think back on certain times. So when I think about my military life and kind of the various seasons that I've lived, I think one of the largest challenges is moving and moving jobs was one of the biggest challenges. And then moving and moving with children was the
Mhm.
other really big challenge. Um, you do it, right? When you're in it, you just do it. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You do it the best that you can. And then when you maybe have some time to breathe and you look back, you think, my gosh, that was really hard. Like, how did I even do that? I don't even know. So I think those are the two really big challenges I faced. I
Mhm.
think a lot of other military spouses face.
Yes.
It's the move, right? And what comes with the move is jobs and moving with kids. It's not easy.
No, I've only had to do it once and they were very little.
Yeah.
Which maybe is better, maybe is worse. I don't know. Y'all find
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, you go. You'll look back and find out one day.
Yeah, yeah. And then so I think that the moves kind of span a lot of the seasons that you've lived in,
Mhm.
but also that you if you think of some of kind of those unique experiences, well, I was going to say that you have, which is true, but also just unique transition points of transitioning
Mhm.
out or the transition of exiting and entering marriage
Yeah.
with kids, like what feels kind of unique about those experiences as we think about maybe career finances, just
Yeah.
life stress.
Yeah, life stress, right? Um, so yeah, transitioning from the military, right, into the civilian world, transitioned at the 10-year mark, meaning there was no pension, there was no health care, right? And so you have to figure out, okay, now how do we live out in this world that we are not really accustomed to living in, right? And what does that look like financially? And so being prepared and understanding that is something I wish I had done more of, right? I was in this space, but sometimes you get so caught up in your own, right? The kind of rat race of things, you forget to take care of oneself. So I think that, being prepared is a great way to navigate anything. Um, I think when then transitioning kind of through, divorce and rebuilding yourself, because that's really what you're doing. You're now saying, okay, I have to rebuild. I have to rebuild on my own. It's just me now, and I have to rebuild my life, maybe financially, professionally. And what does that look like? How do I do that? Uh, you have to be, I think, 10 times stronger than you want to be.
Yeah.
And so it's especially if you have kids. And so it's hard, and there's no way around it. There's no way around it not being hard. You just have to figure out, what resources do I get? How do I make it a little less hard? Where do I take focus and control? And then where do I want my life to go now, right? As I'm rebuilding myself and I have an opportunity to maybe do something completely new, or dive into something I've always wanted to do. So, um, as military spouses, we're always reinventing ourselves. Every duty station you go to, you have to reinvent yourself. You have to make new friends, you have to get new jobs, you have to have new childcare, you have to continuously reinvent yourself. So you just kind of sometimes get thrust into reinventing yourself in a new way, outside of the military. So it's a challenge, right?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I feel like anyone who's been through it would that might be the first word we use. Not the only word, but the first word. Um, So, what's interesting and complicated about finances, right, is it's tied to so many different things. Like you mentioned
Hmm.
healthcare, right? And then the
Hmm.
other big one that we know everyone talks about and thinks about is employment. And of
Yeah.
course, we all know those statistics about
Hmm.
military spouse employment. And even it kind of carries over, I think, a lot into that transition period as families are kind of again figuring out the new
Hmm.
normal of what it looks like to be in the civilian world. Um, so again, you've lived it and then you've
Hmm.
worked with other spouses who are
Hmm.
probably going through that. So what does that military spouse employment, whether that's unemployment or underemployment, what does that look like
Hmm.
in real life for
Yeah.
spouses?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here in real life. It feels terrible, kind of. I mean, let's just like be very honest here. It feels kind of crummy to have to leave your job that you've worked at for 2 to 4 years and then realize that you have to start over somewhere else. We talk about all these statistics, right? I can throw out, lots, right? It takes on average 19 weeks for somebody who's a military spouse to become employed at their new duty station. That's 4 months, right? There is a 23% unemployment rate within our community. There is around what we think a 35% underemployment rate. But there's the one that really gets me, which is that military spouses make 38% less than their civilian counterparts. Right. And that is because it's kind of crummy to have to continue to rebuild your career every 2 to 4 years. You don't get that continuity at most companies to be able to stay and to be able to level up and to get the promotion and to get all of the financial rewards of that. And so the numbers don't lie there. And that's what it actually looks like in real life, is that it can be disheartening, right? It can be kind of sad and not feel great. And so, it's really important, I think, for military spouses to find resources like the MSEP network through the DoD, which says these are companies that actively want to hire military spouses. They know that you're going to move, they have remote work, they want to keep you on a career path for longevity, and you have an opportunity to not fall into the I make 38% less than my civilian counterpart. So I think a lot of it in real life is doing the education yourself to find companies and resources that you can have longevity at their company or organization. And so I think that's kind of the real life, the reality of it. And then what do I do to change that in some way?
Yeah, that's that's interesting. I'm thinking about it from a hiring perspective myself, where we're hiring right now. And like
Yeah.
we obviously understand as an employer this journey in ways that a
Mhm.
lot of employers don't.
Right.
And also I get a lot more military spouse applications than I'm sure many organizations do.
Mhm.
But without a cover letter telling me that they're a military spouse, I can tell when they are
Mhm.
just by looking at their resume from exactly what you're talking about. You see
Mhm.
kind of these short stints. You see kind of maybe there
Mhm.
was like a really, what I imagine is more of a dream job, like correctly qualified,
Mhm.
position. And then you see the admin assistants and the
Yep.
working at,
Exactly.
a retail store, and then maybe back to something that probably was actually in line with what they wanted to do. And
Yeah.
um, when I'm looking at it, not as someone who's empathetic to that, like I'll try and for a
Mhm.
moment take myself out of that. And yeah,
Mhm.
I can't imagine. And also, I'm guessing. I think it's an educated guess, but I'm taking that leap to be like, I think this is a military spouse. I don't know that. So
Right.
what if I didn't have that empathy or that education or understanding as an
Mhm.
employer? Yeah, I'm probably, unfortunately, maybe putting that one right to the side.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I think, exactly what we're talking about. That's,
Yeah. And that's what happens, which is why I think, we can take control as military spouses to find organizations or companies that are actively hiring military spouses. The
hmm
MSEP portal,
yeah,
that says every company within here knows that you are a military spouse right out the gate. You don't have to explain your resume. You don't have to explain gaps in work. You don't have to explain why it looks like you're running from the law,
yeah,
because, you are moving every 2 years. And we want to hire you. And we know that you're capable and you're a good worker and that you're going to do great things. And when a military spouse has employment, there is a whole ripple effect that happens there, right? The family now has more financial stability, right? The family has a little less pressure when, buying the groceries and enrolling kids in camps and doing all of the things. The military spouse themselves has I think an empowerment, right? Of I am contributing financially, I am making money, I am planning for my own future as well as my family's. And so it has this ripple effect that is, I think, very positive for military families. And without it, can be not a positive experience.
yeah. Then you're struggling in all areas,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally, financially, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, What, I mean, so this, I think this is a good lead into you've alluded to a lot, but what would you think,
Yeah.
like, get back to the, maybe the employer side of things,
Hmm.
or the civilian or whatever. What do you think is misunderstood about military spouses in the workforce?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that's misunderstood is that it'll take too long to train somebody and then they're going to leave.
Mhm.
So why would I invest the time? Well, for starters, I think military spouses are the most adaptable, highly trainable individuals that you will ever meet.
Mhm.
So it will not take you very long. And secondly, yes, they may move, but does this job really require you to be in person? The answer might be yes, right? If you are a doctor, a nurse, I don't know, but it might be yes, but it might not be, right? So have we actually looked at this position from an HR standpoint of do I actually need somebody to physically be here? And the idea too of why am I going to invest and train in somebody because they're just going to move in 2 years? Well, the average American statistically leaves their job every 3 to 4 years, anyways. So, what are we really talking about? Duty stations are 2 to 4 years long. So, we really just kind of fit right in with the average American, only we get to wear that badge up front. We get
Mhm.
to have it right up front and say, it's probably coming, so you just get to know this up front, as opposed to maybe a civilian counterpart. Somebody trains and invests and thinks, well, I'll cross my fingers and maybe they'll be here for 10 years. Well, on average, they're going to leave in 4. So, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding around military spouses and a little bit of maybe fear and lack of education by the companies themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're already weaving, the story of careers and finances,
Hmm.
obviously. Anyone who lives and works knows that. So we know that, and you already mentioned, and this is one thing I loved when we talked about, kind of talking about this financial independence and
Hmm.
financial empowerment
Hmm.
for military spouses. So why do you see that as such a critical piece, that financial independence and empowerment for
Yeah.
spouses?
Because quite honestly, you never know what the next day is going to bring as a military spouse. I mean, anybody,
Yeah.
right? Anybody doesn't know what the next day is going to bring. But as a military spouse, you really don't know. I can't tell you, right? When I was married to my first husband, there were I can't even count how many times he would walk out the door and I would literally think to myself, I don't know if you're going to come back. I legitimately don't know, right? So there is an extra sense of I don't know what's going to come next, right? And if I have my finances and I have a job and I'm trying to, build a career and I have financial empowerment and I'm bringing in income, it gives me a little bit more peace of mind as to what's going to come next. It might be that they don't walk back in the door, right? And what am I going to do? My SGLI is only going to go so far, right, in life for my children and for myself. So, what do I need to do to prepare my family and to know that I can be okay on my own? That goes with, right, somebody not coming home. That goes with a divorce, right? Something that's unexpected. Nobody gets married thinking they're going to
Yeah.
get divorced, right? So the unexpected of I can financially stand on my own 2 feet, or even injury, right?
Mhm.
If the service member gets injured, which again, we have a more heightened rate and risk of that. Now we have an injury. Does that injury mean that this person now is forced to leave the military? And now this person may not be able to have any employment because of their injury. And so now I am responsible for all of our finances. So I think having your own financial empowerment gives you peace of mind in kind of any situation that's coming at night, that I can have a little bit more control in anything that becomes uncontrollable or
Mhm.
unpredictable,
Yeah. And like those are the obvious big ones for our community, but the other one we've been talking
right?
about a lot is transition. That's another,
Yeah.
known in that at some point you will, like we don't
Yeah.
know when, how, if
Yeah.
it's if you can anticipate it or not.
Yeah.
But that's the point where at least one of you is not going to have a job immediately,
That's right.
perhaps. And also like we're talking about just in life, right? Like, I don't know if we've seen in the last few years tons of people getting laid off, and you
Yeah,
just never know. So whether, if you're listening and you're like, well, that's sad and I don't want to think about those things, well, do because it's important. But
yeah,
even not thinking about those things, there can
yeah,
be these things that happen to us in life that are gonna
yeah.
impact our financial future.
Well, and to that point, right? I had a colonel once tell me, he said, Sarah, he said, everybody's going to leave the military one of three ways. He goes, one, they're either going to separate from the service. Two, they're going to retire from the service. Or three, they're going to pass away, right? They're going to, not come home. And so it's inevitable that you will leave the military. It's a guarantee you
Yeah.
will leave the military. It's just how, right? And the transition space is a space where you get to have control over. You get to have say in it. You get to plan for it. I know here at Armed Forces Mutual, we talk so much about understanding your military versus civilian pay.
Mhm.
We want you to understand it. We have tables and charts on it that say this is what you are getting paid in the military, your service member, and this is how much you have to make in the civilian world just to break even. And it is usually between $30,000 and $60,000 more. And so it is something that you can know and understand and then move forward in. So the transition space is coming, whether you want to or not, right? Like everyone's leaving the military at some place. You get to plan for it when you're going to transition out of the service, and being a part of it as a military spouse and being a part of that conversation from the
Mhm.
financial aspect is so important.
It is. So let's stay there for a little bit. Yeah, we know that's happening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what do you recommend that families could be doing one, two, however many years out you want to talk about
Yeah. Yeah.
to set themselves up for success?
Yeah. So I think you should start 1 to 2 years out the military. I'm going to give some like really tangible things here because I think that's important. Start 1 to 2 years out. Download and understand the military versus civilian pay so that you understand how much money you need to be making when you leave the military. It's not an apples to apples comparison. The third thing would be understand your taxes. This is the one that bites everybody a year out of service. They all of a sudden have a $20,000 or $30,000 tax bill because they didn't understand what they were receiving tax free from the military and how it comes to you in the civilian world. The next thing would be understand your life insurance before you go through the VA disability claims process. You're going to lose your SGLI as a military spouse. You're going to lose SGLI as a service member. You have to replace it, right? You have to replace your life insurance. And so it's really important to start that process before the VA disability claims process. And then if you're retiring from the service, then you need to understand SBP, what the cost of it is and what it provides for your spouse and your child. And I would say those are where you should start, um, and and move forward from there.
Yeah. And all of that stuff is stuff you can think about today.
Yeah, you can start today doing that. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I imagine those things change. So you want to be close-ish when you can be, to understand what it actually looks like. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So, if you're there, there are resources available.
There are resources.
So,
And sometimes I think military spouses get a little intimidated by finances. I think sometimes they, finances are messy, right? They're emotional and they're messy. Um, our relationship with money was established at about 7 years old. That's statistically, right? About 7 years old establishes your relationship with money, and you have to have an open line of communication with your spouse about that. I will give you myself as an example, right? I am a saver. I always have been. It's how I was raised. I'm a saver. I probably overly save, right? In that. And my husband is not. He's not a saver. He is a I will figure it out when it comes because I've always figured it out. And so we had to have a very like heart to heart conversation when we were getting married, especially later in life, about okay, how do we find this balance? And what we realized is it's great because he pushes me to take the trip, right? Do the thing. It's okay. And I push him more to think a little bit more about before you buy that, do you really need it? And
Hmm.
so we come to a meeting of the minds. But we had to come to a meeting of the minds because we have different core values around money and how we view money. And that is not unique in any way, shape, or
Yeah.
form. I think every family experiences that. And so having open conversations about it, knowing resources and not being afraid or embarrassed to say, I don't know what a spousal IRA is, or I don't know what a 401k is. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Learn it. And then you now know.
Yeah, because I think the other thing you're speaking to is that, or that I'm thinking of, is that so often, and maybe this might not be true of active duty couples in the same way, just because of the dynamics of, deployment and spouses
Mhm.
taking on more responsibilities often when that happens. But I think
Yeah.
certainly we see in the civilian workforce that a lot of gender stereotypes play in to when
Hmm.
money comes in, and that tends to be something that a male partner may
Hmm.
control more. And
Hmm.
I think about that all the time. And when we had our first meeting, and even now, I'm like, oh, I need to have some of these conversations myself, because
Yeah.
yeah, I just get comfortable, like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you can do the taxes, or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But um, yeah, tomorrow we don't know what tomorrow holds.
Yeah.
Will I know how to do my taxes?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
but hopefully you know a resource to go to,
yes,
right? You're like, but I do know the resource, and so
yes,
I'll go learn. I go to Bob, and
yeah,
Bob helps me with my taxes or
yes,
wherever it is.
exactly.
But
Um,
yeah, it's just it's important to have visibility, I think, and it's okay for one person to be the more dominant in
yeah,
taking over those responsibilities. Just everyone needs transparency in it. And the military spouse community, over 50% of military spouses handle the day-to-day finances, because like you said, the cadence of being a military spouse, the other person's gone, so a lot, they don't know when the water bill is due, and they don't know when the electric bill is due because they just kind of plug and play, as they're coming home around, training ops or deployments or things like that. So it is very common for military spouses to be the ones who are handling the day to day finances.
yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Well, it is different. And I think certainly what we hear more on the post-service side is this kind of lack of understanding, especially around VA benefits, like, and what, certain money may be coming in. And we do hear
Mhm.
that sometimes, spouses feel in the dark on the financial picture. And you mentioned too, like, finances are messy and people don't want to talk about it. I think
Yep.
for a really long time, it's been the number one, source of conflict in relationships. Um, so, I mean, we're talking about transparency, but we do hear
Yeah.
this a lot more. Than it breaks my heart when we hear, spouses like, I don't even know. Um, what our financial picture looks like. And when I try to
Yeah.
talk to my spouse about it, I get the, oh, don't worry about it, or, oh, you don't need to know. Um, so I don't know, what advice do you have if that's what you're being met with as a spouse,
Yeah.
um, in your
Yeah. And
relationship?
I think that's, you've hit on something that is probably happening more than we think, right? And so it's having not a strong financial communication. So what I would say is, and this was something that kind of how I approached it, right? When I got remarried and wanted to have a lot of transparency and make sure that, we both knew what was going on financially, is take one item, just one thing that you wish the other person knew or understood about your finances, and sit down with just one item
Mhm.
and go through one item. And it might take a week, it might take about 2 weeks, but literally just one thing that weighs on you, that might bother you or you have questions about. Articulate it as, this is heavy in my mind. This brings me anxiety or worry, and we can alleviate that anxiety or worry because I'd like to understand this one thing. And I think sometimes with finances, people try and bite it all off
Yeah.
at one
Yeah.
time, and you can't. It's too much, and that's where a lot of frustrations come in and tempers get raised. So just pick one thing. And and then when that one thing, you understand that one thing, pick another thing, right? And I think you'll find too that it's kind of it opens up a two-way street of communication. The other person also might be thinking to self, hey, there's one thing that I wish you understood better too about maybe me as a person, or about our finances that you could help me with. So I think it's a great way to just kind of open up dialogue,
Yeah.
is start so small, one thing.
Which is probably true on a variety of topics, but you're right.
Yeah,
I think this one gets really hot and really complicated and overwhelming really quickly when you
really
try and
fast.
take on
Yeah,
too much stuff. So,
yeah,
and I think too, I mean, we're essentially talking about our own little mini financial education in our relationship,
hmm,
but also kind of now zooming out, financial education that we've been talking about throughout on a
hmm,
broader spectrum. Um, for our military spouses, we'll focus on our spouses.
yeah,
What do you think are some of those blind spots financially that
yeah.
you're seeing a lot that are good things to become educated about?
Yeah. I think the number one thing is the spousal IRA. If you don't know what it is, Google it.
Mhm.
Or come to Armed Forces Mutual and we
Yeah.
have a whole resource page on it. Um, Spousal IRA. So a lot of times, because we've been talking about this problem with military spouses getting employment and having jobs, there are times when you are unemployed, right? Whether it is because I can't find a job, or I've decided to stay home and my work is within the home. I have done both. I have worked outside of the home and I have worked just inside of my home, just raising children, and equally as hard, right? It is equally there. So it is real work. And so for the military spouse who finds themselves just working within the home, regardless of the reason, that you can invest in a spousal IRA, which says if your service member is employed, right, which they are, that you can contribute to your own IRA in your own name up to $7,500 per year. And that is huge because you're investing in your direct future, but ultimately just your family's future, right? If your service member's investing in their TSP or gets a civilian job and invests in a 401k, that's in their name. That is for them. Now, it's for the family one day, right? But it's in their name. And so you should have the same. So I think the spousal IRA is a huge blind spot for military spouses. I also think that people think, oh, well, you can save up to $7,500. I'd never be able to put that much away. Then don't put $100. Put something is better than nothing, right? Put $100 a month away for your work inside the home, which is worth way more than $100 a
Yeah.
month. Right? I think that that's a very big blind spot
Yeah.
for military spouses.
Yeah, I remember when you first mentioned it, I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
completely unfamiliar, and I'm so
Yep.
glad that to hear that it exists. Oh. Um, Other things, spouses, just in general, I mean, obviously, we're talking about how Armed Forces Mutual is a resource, but what
Yeah.
are other easy things that spouses can be doing to educate themselves, or other where should they be?
Yeah.
I mean, Google, right? We all have Google, but what are other, top-notch resources that you guys have on different things, or other places folks can go?
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I really like about our website at Armed Forces Mutual is that the team that I lead is our member benefits team, and they're the ones that puts out a lot of our resource content. And so it is things, like spousal IRAs, like the military transition timeline, like the military versus civilian pay chart to understand that. We have basic budgeting downloads, right? To start your budget conversation, right? Start that one small thing is I'm going to write a budget out. So yes, we have a lot of really great resources. I think for military spouses though, too, right? If you're looking for employment, MSCP is a great place. If you're looking for what you don't know yet and you think you want to change or you want to reinvent yourself, is to get a mentor. And there is ACP, American Corporate Partners, has an amazing mentorship program for military spouses. And it's a year long, you meet once a month, and it is a direct direct person who has been placed with you to say, let's figure out where you want to go, right? In your career, do you want to get back into the workforce? Do you want to level up? What does that look like? So I think mentorship can be a really big and great resource for military spouses.
Mhm. And I'll plug, we have a podcast episode with ACP where they
Ah,
talk all about, and someone who went through the program themselves. So if you want that,
yeah.
go find that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I am on my third protege with
oh,
ACP.
you're a mentor.
I
Excellent,
am a
excellent.
mentor,
Yeah,
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 and it's great on the mentor side and on the for the mentee. So both ways, it's a two-way street. If you're looking to have a mentor, talk to ACP. If you're looking for a mentor, talk to
yeah.
ACP.
It all goes back to that. But yeah, I think that's too is that, it gets so easy to be overwhelmed as
Mhm.
military and veteran families in general about the vast, resources available and like who's got our, I think the last time, I heard the statistic, it's like there's 77,000
Yeah.
VSOs. So
Google's overwhelming in this realm. So having a little bit of a trusted resource, you can go to and then find kind of the trusted resources from there, like a
yeah.
chain effect, is a good place to start because you just blindly Google, um,
Yeah, and
transition. It's a lot. And there sometimes, and it should be known that there are people who have ill
yeah,
intentions, right? Um,
especially
our
in the
military
financial
community
sector.
is actually very highly targeted for fraud, for financial abuse. It's awful to say, but it is true.
Good
So,
to know.
yes, trusted resources is really important.
Yeah, trusted resources that are tailored to your unique
Hmm.
um picture because yeah, like all these resources that you're talking about, these are not necessarily civilian resources. I'm sure there are lots of those
No.
too, but so they might
Yeah.
not be showing up in a Google search. Oh. Um, Anything else you want to say about like benefits and entitlements that are available to
Mhm.
spouses or things that Armed Forces Mutual can help with just to make sure
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
hit
Cover it all.
yeah.
I think some really great, we've talked kind of about the resources from the job lens, and from the kind of career lens, and then from a personal lens, right? In that mentorship space. Um, I think that from a benefit side, it's really important to understand life insurance. I will say a lot of times we think so heavily about maybe the primary person making, the primary service member out there, but we have to also think about ourselves. What would happen, right? We don't want to think about stuff like this, but what happens if I'm no longer here?
Mhm.
Who's picking up kids? Who's cleaning? Who's cooking? Who's doing all these other things so the person can continue to live the cadence of work? And it's like, that's really expensive. So when you're in the military, you have this bubble and this safety net of that, right? And they give you this life insurance and all of that. But I think we have to realize that in one, it might not be enough to keep a family afloat, especially if something should happen to the spouse, right? Who's going to take over all of the care of kids? That's very expensive. If you've been at home doing that, what's going to happen? So I think that's kind of a blind spot we don't really talk about. And so understanding that is really important. And then on the kind of benefit side, understanding VA disability and compensation and benefits. It's important for you as the spouse to understand that
Yes.
because your service member, that's their benefits. But when that service member is no longer there, all of that money ends, right? And so it's important to know that that's going to stop. And there are ways that you can apply for additional benefits and things like that. And so knowing that I think is very important. And then knowing where do I go to get those questions answered. Armed Forces Mutual is a resource of that. But those are kind of the two big things from a financial standpoint, I
Mhm.
think that get overlooked when, talking about transitioning from the military or being in the active duty space in the military and thinking about this. So those are two things I think that, from a benefit side, that you really need to get locked down.
So very important and they get so easy for us to overlook because we don't want to be there mentally. But
No.
I mean, I can't speak from experience other than doing it with our father-in-law, but you're not there mentally when you're dealing with it, you know,
Yeah.
when you have to either. So do it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And it's important too for, say, at Armed Forces Mutual, we try and take that guesswork out. I am very proud and humbled to be able to work with our survivors because we try and alleviate all of that stress. We try and say, okay, because you were in a stressful environment and there's so much happening, we know what to do. So we know what forms you need to apply for, we know what benefits you need. We try and take the guesswork out of it for a surviving spouse. And that's a bit unique, right, than to maybe companies that just work with civilians. And so I think that's important too as you're looking around and talking to people is how do they understand my community? Is your resource applicable to me? And so that's something to look at because there are right places that's all they deal. We deal just with the military, which is different. It's just different.
It is different, so let's treat it as such. So to kind of begin to close us out, and to take it back to you, because I think it's always good to connect back to who we're listening to. What
Yeah.
has kind of your financial independence journey meant to you, taught you? How have you benefited from it?
Yeah. For me personally, once I made the decision to become more financially aware of my, current situation and take kind of control of that and learn, I felt a really big sense of pride in myself as well as a sense of peace. And those are kind of two things that I think are really important. So on my journey as a military spouse, and then my journey in being a very young military spouse, and really not kind of knowing and understanding our finances and what was happening, to really sitting down and educating myself on it, and setting goals for myself and for our family. There was a big sense of empowerment and pride, and then peace that came with it. I sleep better at night, legitimately, and I wish that for everyone. And so it's kind of like having to do the hard work, and the beginning is the hardest part, and then set up kind of standards and automatic things, and it becomes a lot easier. But for myself, personally, that was the greatest thing, was a sense of peace. And from a professional standpoint, you know, I love being able to talk to somebody, especially a military spouse, who says, I never knew that. And that has changed the way that I'm doing something, that has fundamentally changed, how I'm operating, or our household's a happier place, or I'm more at peace, or, all of the things. So, full circle there. It definitely comes around, and it is something that I am so passionate about talking about, is empowering military spouses to understand your finances for your family, but for yourself as well.
Yeah. And then you've been saying these throughout, but I always like to kind of end like, and especially thinking if someone's kind of in it, feeling super overwhelmed and they're
Mhm.
listening today, what is one piece of advice or one step that you can suggest that they take just to get moving?
Yeah, I think if you're overwhelmed in trying to find a career, then I would go to MSCP and find a job through that portal. If you are overwhelmed in, I don't know what to do with myself, I would find a mentor. And if you're overwhelmed by your finances, I would start with one thing, and I would start with a clear budget. And I would sit down and I would write down all of your guaranteed expenses in a month, everything you have to pay: mortgage, gas, little league, whatever, all of the things that you have to pay. Just write them all down, get it out of your head, put it on paper, see it, and then move forward from there. And I think those are the one thing I would do in kind of each one of those lanes. to feel a little less overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's perfect. And especially if you're in the transition space, you may be feeling all of those things all at once.
Hmm.
And then some.
Hmm.
So I appreciate, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate little action items. And again, those really trusted resources who get what you're
Hmm.
going through
Yeah,
to
that's
help
super
you along
important.
the way. That's critical. Well, Sarah, I really appreciate you joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience along with your professional expertise. I think that's always the best combination when we're trying to reach our spouses and help them feel a little less alone, but also a little bit more prepared. So I'm grateful for you coming on and being willing to be so open. I know it's going to benefit
Yeah.
folks.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. It's been great, and I really appreciate what the Veteran Spouse Network's doing to get this information out there.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes, we are not everything. So how can we get more info about all of these amazing resources out there to the people who are connected to us? That's the goal. That's the goal. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next month. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.